Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming to the presentation today of Active Shooter Defense. I'm Patrick Hoy, and a little background on me so you understand where I'm coming from, because I'd like to think that what you're about to see is fairly unique in the safety training world today because of my background. I'm a retired Air Force officer and attack pilot. I used to fly A-10s in the Air Force, and I was fortunate enough to be a flight lead, instructor pilot, and tactics development test pilot. I also studied adversary pilots to learn how they think, what their equipment works like, so as to develop tactics to defeat them. And you'll see that aptitude come today here too. Also, the Air Force did me a favor in sending me off to Air Force Flight Safety Officer School at the University of Southern California and taught me how to investigate an aircraft mishap. Essentially, when something goes wrong, airplane crashes, or maybe it just dings a wingtip on taxi, that I know how to go in and figure out what happened, why it happened, and how we can prevent it from happening again. So all of those skills I learned and refined in the Air Force, and I'm bringing that to you here today. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm not a law enforcement officer. This presentation is totally different from what you'll hear from a law enforcement officer. Essentially, what I'm going to be talking about today are those 5 to 10 minutes from when the shooter initially pulls out his weapon and starts shooting until the police actually arrive. That I'm going to be talking about that period of time when essentially you're on your own. And I'm going to be giving you some ideas of what the shooter's thinking about and how you can plan courses of action that you can take to improve your chances of survival. That's essentially what this is about today. Here are the goals for the presentation. We're going to define what the term active shooter means, because understanding that is important to distinguishing that from other type shooting events that take place in society. We're going to explore the mindset of the typical active shooter. The last 4 years, I functioned as emergency management specialist at Billings Clinic. And about 4 years ago, a young lady came up to me and asked me to develop this presentation mainly as a way to help her nurses come up with response actions in the event a shooting incident like this should take place in a hospital. And so it's kind of geared toward a hospital, but in going back and reading incident reports that the Federal Emergency Management Administration has on file in their library of active shooter incidents going all the way back to Charles Whitman shooting up the University of Texas campus in Austin, Texas in August of 1966. I've tried to find little nuggets of information in those reports that help us understand the mindset of an individual who would do something like this, because I believe that in understanding what his motivations are, what he's thinking about, and what his physical limitations might be, that it can help us better understand how we can counter his actions. So we're going to talk about the mindset of the typical active shooter from that perspective. I'm going to share lessons learned and similarities in previous events so that you can see how perhaps the environment you function in here in your place of work might sort of parallel one of those, and thus learn from them how you can use your environment to your advantage if a shooter comes into your place of business like this. Finally, we're going to discuss some tactics that you can employ against an active shooter to increase your chances of survival. But the bottom line to this presentation is to help you develop your individual plan of action, because what you're going to learn here today is applicable no matter where you are. It's going to be keyed to your building here. But you can take the lessons that you've learned today to the mall, to the church, to the movie theater, to your children's schools. You can employ these tactics anywhere, because they essentially will work anywhere and everywhere. The active shooter incident typically starts right here with a targeted killing with the motive of revenge. I take you to a post office in Edmond, Oklahoma in August of 1986, where a disgruntled postal worker by the name of Patrick Sherrill felt that he had been unfairly treated by getting fired from his job at the post office. And he held a grudge against his supervisor and his manager. And after getting fired, he felt that his only recourse was to go back the next day with his handgun and start off by fulfilling his desire for revenge by killing both his manager and his supervisor. And thus he fulfilled his revenge motive, but then it became an active shooter incident of the classical kind when he took his gun out onto the mail sorting floor and just randomly began killing anyone and everyone that he encountered. He wound up killing 13 more of his co-workers before he finally took his life as the police were closing in. That is the classic example of an active shooter event. It typically will start with the motive of revenge, anger at a manager or supervisor for getting fired. Students in school could be anger at society, anger at teachers, anger at friends, anger at the bullies in school. Take you to Columbine High School in April of 1999, where Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold committed the Columbine High atrocity. Their motive was just a general anger at society that was essentially born out of them being bullied as underclassmen. In April of 1999, they were 1 month from graduation. They were seniors in high school, but 2 to 3 years prior to that, as underclassmen, they had been horribly bullied by the seniors and juniors in school, and they carried a grudge, and they did not deal with it well. And they did not get any help. Their parents and friends did not recognize it. Their teachers did not recognize it. And they wound up carrying out the dastardly effects of their carrying that grudge for 2 to 3 years in April of 1999 when they killed 13 people at Columbine High School before they themselves committed suicide. So, and those 13 people were all killed randomly. None of them were targeted. It was simply a random killing right from the beginning when they tried to just kill as many people as they possibly could. That's the classic example of an active shooter event that perhaps starts with a targeted killing and then turns random. And that's where it gets dangerous for us, because the vast majority of us are not going to be a possible targeted victim by an active shooter, but we might be unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and thus we need to be prepared to react in that vein. And that's what I'm talking to you about today, is essentially we in our daily lives going about them, we're not armed, we're not prepared for combat, but we just might be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and thus what can we do if that should happen? That's where we're going with this.